We often assume that the people who change history begin with power, privilege, or opportunity. Yet one of the most influential men in history had none of these. He was born into slavery, denied his birthday, separated from his family, beaten, starved, silenced, and told by the law, by culture, and by religion that he was less than human. And yet he would become one of the most powerful voices for justice, human dignity, and moral clarity in American history. This is not merely a story about escaping physical chains. It's a story about refusing to let circumstances determine identity, refusing to let the past dictate the future, and refusing to allow a corrupted version of Christianity to eclipse the true gospel of Jesus Christ. It stands as a reminder that the gospel is not fragile, it does not depend on comfort, it does not require permission from power, and it never is invalidated by suffering. Frederick Douglass was born around 1818 on a plantation in Talbot County, Maryland. He did not know his exact birthday, a deliberate cruelty of slavery that was meant to strip people of history and personhood. He was separated from his mother as an infant, and he would only see her a handful of times before her death. From the beginning, Douglass learned what slavery truly was: not merely forced labor, but enforced ignorance, relational violence, and the systematic destruction of any hope. Yet even in this environment, seeds of resistance were planted. When Douglass was sent to Baltimore as a young boy, his enslaver's wife began teaching him the alphabet. Once her husband stopped the lessons, declaring that literacy would make a slave unfit to be a slave, Douglass understood something crucial. Education was not just forbidden, it was dangerous. And anything dangerous to an unjust system was worth pursuing. Douglass continued to teach himself to read in secret, trading bread for lessons with poor white children and studying newspapers, speeches, and scripture. Literacy did not merely open his mind, it awakened his conscience. But with knowledge came pain. Douglass later wrote that learning to read made him acutely aware of his bondage. Truth did not immediately free him emotionally, it actually tormented him. Yet he pressed on, because truth was better than comfortable ignorance. In reflecting on these early years, Douglass would later explain what literacy meant to him. Once you learn to read, you will be forever free. He understood that education was not simply about information, but transformation. Knowledge reshaped how he saw himself, his world, and the lie that he was meant to remain enslaved. And this is a pattern that many may recognize. Following Christ does not always make life easier. Sometimes it makes injustice more visible. Sometimes obedience heightens suffering before it relieves it. But the gospel never calls us to ignorance for the sake of peace. Few figures in American history offer a clearer distinction between false Christianity and true faith than Frederick Douglass. Douglass was not hostile to Christianity, he was hostile to hypocrisy. He famously distinguished between the Christianity of Christ and the Christianity of slaveholders. One liberated the oppressed, while the other justified their chains. One confronted sin, while the other sanctified it. Late in life, after years of witnessing Scripture abused in the name of power, Douglass would speak with unmistakable clarity. I love the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ. I therefore hate the corrupt, slave-holding, woman-whipping, cradle-plundering Christianity of this land. His words were not a rejection of faith, but a defense of it, calling Christianity back to Christ himself. Douglass saw how Scripture was being twisted to enforce obedience, silence resistance, and baptize cruelty. Yet instead of abandoning his faith, he held those professing Scripture accountable to its claims. The gospel Douglass encountered in the Bible spoke of human dignity, moral responsibility, and a God who hears the cries of the oppressed. And that message did not end with him. It echoes down the halls of history into future generations, our own included. The world insists that we are nothing more than products of our circumstances. Yet Douglass understood something deeper. Circumstances do not invalidate the gospel. Only the misuse of the gospel can do that. At one point, Douglass was sent to a man known as a slave breaker, tasked with crushing the resistance through violence, and it nearly worked. But one day, Douglass decided to fight back. He later described this moment not simply as self-defense, but as a spiritual turning point. Though he remained enslaved, something inside of him was now free. He would no longer see himself as property. Looking back on this point, Douglass described it with words that captured both dignity and defiance. You have seen how a man was made a slave. Now you shall see how a slave was made a man. In that moment, the lie of inferiority lost its power. Though still enslaved in body, he was no longer enslaved in spirit. And this moment showcased a difficult but necessary truth. Faithfulness to God is not measured by how quietly we endure injustice. The gospel never confuses submission with surrender to evil. There are times when obedience to Christ requires, and indeed can even look like, resistance. But righteous indignation is not born from anger or revenge, but from a desire to stand for what is right. Douglass eventually escaped slavery in 1838, disguised as a sailor. He arrived in the North with little money, no legal protection, and constant fear of capture. Freedom did not erase the trauma. It did not erase the fear, and it did not erase responsibility. Douglass soon discovered that freedom carried its own calling. His voice, sharpened by suffering and disciplined by truth, became a force that could not be ignored. Reflecting on freedom after his escape, Douglass offered an insight shaped by experience rather than theory. I did not know that I was a slave until I found out that I couldn't do the things that I wanted. Freedom, he realized, was not merely the absence of chains, it was the presence of purpose, responsibility, and moral agency. He spoke, wrote, debated, and challenged the nation that claimed liberty while practicing bondage. In one of his most famous speeches, he would say, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, and all your religious parade are fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages." Douglass used his voice to call a lost nation back to God, and it would cost him dearly. He endured threats, violence, betrayal, and deep loneliness, yet he refused to let bitterness define him. One of the most powerful aspects of Frederick Douglass's life is that he never denied his past, but neither did he allow it to imprison him. He remembered, he testified, he warned, but he did not live as a victim. In his later writings and speeches, Douglass often returned to the theme of growth through struggle. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. He understood that transformation, personal or moral, rarely comes without pain. The past may shape us, but it does not have the authority to rule us. And this is not sentimental. It's deeply uncomfortable, yet biblical. See, Scripture never asks us to minimize our wounds or excuse the harm done to us, but it also refuses to let pain have the final word. Our identity is not rooted in what was done to us, but in what God is actively doing within us. Frederick Douglass's life stands as evidence that the gospel does not erase scars, but it does redeem them. Douglass's circumstances constantly told him who he was supposed to be. property, inferior, silent, hopeless. But the gospel told him something else. That truth, once grasped, became louder than chains, threats, or laws. And that is the challenge for us. There will always be whispers of fear, temptation, bitterness, the pressure of culture, and even the lure of comfort. And there will always be the voice of God, calling us to dignity, truth, and freedom. Circumstances will always speak, but which voice will you choose to listen to? Frederick Douglass did not live a perfect life, but he did live a faithful one. He reminds us that the gospel is not proven in comfort, but in conviction. Not in ease, but in endurance. Not in silence, but in truth. Near the end of his life, reflecting on decades of resistance and faithfulness, Douglass offered a sobering truth. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, and it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these things will continue till they are resisted with either words or blows or with both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. His words remind us that faithfulness often requires courage, not only to believe, but to act in accordance with what we believe. His life confronts us with a question that we cannot avoid. Will we allow our circumstances to define our faith? Or will we allow our faith to redefine our circumstances? Because the gospel was never meant to be chained, and neither were we.